The people who fall apart when life gets hard didn't become weak in the moment of crisis. They were unprepared long before it arrived. And the terrifying thing about that sentence, the thing that should stop you cold, is that life is not asking you whether you are ready before it sends what is coming. It never has. It never will. There is a test approaching every single person alive right now. For some of you it is already in motion, you can feel it in the background of your days, that low hum of pressure that hasn't fully landed yet but is unmistakably on its way. For others it will arrive without warning, in a phone call, a diagnosis, a betrayal, a loss, a collapse of something you built your entire sense of security around. The question is never will the test come. The question is always, who will you be when it does? And the answer to that question is not decided in the moment of the test. It is decided right now. In how you are training, or failing to train, the most powerful instrument you possess. Your mind. There is a story about two houses. Both built in the same neighborhood. Both looked identical from the outside, same walls, same windows, same roof. Same street. Same sky above them both. Then the storm came. One house stood. Not without damage, it bore the marks of the storm, the scratches and the strain. But it stood. It held. The people inside it were shaken but safe. The other house came down. Not because the storm was unfair. Not because that house was unlucky. But because when it was being built, quietly, in the ordinary days before the storm existed, someone had cut corners on the foundation. It looked fine. Nobody could see the difference from the outside. But underground, where the real work happens, where the invisible architecture of survival is built, the foundation was weak. And a weak foundation always reveals itself eventually. The storm doesn't create the weakness. It simply shows you what was already there. Your mind is the foundation. And every day you spend not training it, every day you spend numbing it, distracting it, feeding it cheap content and shallow stimulation and the comfortable lie that you will deal with things when they come, is a day you are cutting corners on the only foundation that will matter when the storm arrives. This is not a warning delivered in fear. This is an invitation to something extraordinary. Because the same mind that is capable of crumbling under pressure, is equally capable, when properly trained, of becoming something that pressure cannot break. The choice between those two outcomes is made in ordinary days. Days like today. The first training, train your mind to sit with discomfort. Most people spend the majority of their waking lives doing one thing above all others. Running from discomfort. Not dramatically. Not consciously. But in 1,000 small, daily, habitual ways, reaching for the phone the moment boredom arrives. Switching on noise the moment silence becomes uncomfortable. Choosing the easier path the moment a harder one presents itself. Numbing the anxiety with food, with entertainment, with the endless frictionless scroll of other people's curated lives, anything at all, rather than sit with the discomfort that is trying to teach them something essential. And then life arrives with something that cannot be numbed. Cannot be scrolled past. Cannot be avoided or postponed or distracted away from. And they have no capacity for it. Because they never built it. There was a young man named Elias who prided himself on his comfort. He had engineered his life, carefully, deliberately, and with genuine skill, around the elimination of discomfort. Good job. Nice apartment. Carefully curated social circle. Everything smooth. Everything manageable. Everything exactly within the parameters of what he knew he could handle. Then his mother was diagnosed with something serious. And suddenly, overnight, life demanded from Elias a capacity for sustained, unrelenting discomfort that his entire life had been specifically designed to avoid. He didn't have it. Not because he was a bad person. Not because he lacked intelligence or potential or love for his mother. But because the muscle of sitting with what is hard, the muscle that allows a human being to remain present, functional, and clear-eyed in the middle of real suffering, had never once been exercised. It had only ever been avoided. The Stoics trained this muscle deliberately. Epictetus, a man who spent years of his life as a slave, who had every conceivable external comfort stripped from him, built a philosophy around the radical practice of voluntary discomfort. He taught his students not to wait for hardship to find them. He taught them to seek it out in small doses. To sit in the cold. To skip the meal. To choose the harder path when the easier one was available, not as punishment, but as preparation. He understood something that most of us are only willing to understand after it is too late. Comfort, uninterrupted and unchallenged, does not produce strength. It produces fragility wearing the costume of ease. The training begins with something simple. Something you can do today. The next time discomfort arrives, in a feeling, in a difficult conversation, in the silence of an unoccupied moment, resist the reflex to reach for relief. Sit with it. Not forever. Not without any support. But long enough to discover something that will change your relationship with difficulty permanently. You can survive more than you have been letting yourself experience. And every time you sit with discomfort instead of running from it, you are laying a course of brick in a foundation that no storm will be able to move. The second training, train your mind to examine its own stories. Your mind tells stories. All day. Every day. An unbroken, largely unexamined narrative running in the background of every experience you have, interpreting events, assigning meaning, deciding what things say about you and about the world and about what is possible for your life. And here is what most people never stop long enough to realize. Most of those stories are not true. Not deliberately false. Not consciously fabricated. But inherited, from childhood, from fear, from the accumulated weight of past experiences that the mind has turned into universal laws without ever asking permission. I am not the kind of person who succeeds at things like this. People always leave eventually. If I want something done properly, I have to do it alone. I don't deserve what I want. Things never work out for me. These are stories. They are not facts. But an untrained mind cannot tell the difference. An untrained mind accepts its own narrative as reality, and then builds a life within the boundaries of that narrative, never once testing whether the boundaries are real or simply believed. There was a woman named Amara who had spent 37 years believing she was not intelligent enough for the opportunities she secretly wanted. This story had arrived in childhood, from a teacher whose words had landed in a young mind with a permanence they never deserved, and had been reinforced by every subsequent failure, every self-sabotage, every time she had pulled back from something that required her to bet on herself. She told herself she was being realistic. She was not being realistic. She was being loyal to a story. At 37, she enrolled in a course that terrified her. Not because she had stopped believing the story entirely, she hadn't. But because someone she trusted had asked her a question that lodged itself in her mind and refused to leave. What if that story isn't about who you are, but only about what you were taught to believe about yourself? That question is worth sitting with for the rest of your life. Because the mind that cannot examine its own stories is a mind that is being governed by its past. And a mind governed by its past cannot respond to the present with clarity. It can only react, through the filter of every wound, every assumption, every inherited belief that has never been questioned. Marcus Aurelius returned to this practice obsessively in his private writings. A man who governed the most powerful empire in the known world spent his evenings examining his own judgments. Questioning his own reactions. Asking himself, is this thought actually true? Is this story actually serving me? Or is it simply familiar? Familiarity and truth are not the same thing. Train your mind to know the difference. The practice is straightforward, even if it is not easy. When a strong reaction arises, when you feel the familiar tightening of an old wound, the automatic withdrawal of an old defense, pause. And ask. What story am I telling myself right now? Where did this story come from? Is it actually true, or is it simply what I have always believed? You do not have to dismantle the story in a single sitting. You do not have to replace it immediately with something more flattering or more comfortable. You just have to see it for what it is. A story. Written in the past. By a version of you that was doing the best they could with what they had. And you, the version of you that exists right now, are allowed to write something different. The third training, train your mind to live in the present. There is a particular kind of suffering that has nothing to do with what is actually happening right now. It is the suffering of the mind that cannot stop living in the past or the future, that is constantly replaying what went wrong or catastrophizing about what might go wrong, while the actual present moment passes unlived, unexamined, and unutilized. Most human suffering is manufactured in the mind's relationship with time. Not in the present. In the story about the past that will not release. In the projection into the future that the mind mistakes for reality. In the gap between what is happening and what the untrained mind insists should be happening instead. There was a man named Samuel who lost his business at 44. Not through negligence, through circumstances genuinely beyond his control. The business was gone. That was the reality. The present fact. Unchangeable and complete. But Samuel did not live in that present fact. He lived in the past, replaying every decision, every missed signal, every moment where a different choice might have produced a different outcome. And he lived in the future, catastrophizing about everything the loss meant for the next decade of his life, running increasingly dark projections of failure and irrelevance and permanent diminishment. He was suffering in 3 time zones simultaneously. And none of that suffering was changing the present fact. The business was still gone. The replaying and the catastrophizing were not reconstructing it. They were only destroying what remained, his health, his relationships, his ability to think clearly about what was actually available to him right now. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in his Meditations that cut straight through all of it. Confine yourself to the present. 3 words. The entire practice contained in 3 words. The present moment is the only place where action is possible. The only place where clarity can be found. The only place where the actual work of rebuilding, of whatever has been lost or damaged or disrupted, can actually happen. The past is information. Not a residence. The future is direction. Not a certainty. The present is the only place you actually live. Training the mind to return to the present, again and again, with patience and without self-judgment, is not passive. It is one of the most demanding and most rewarding disciplines a human being can undertake. Because the untrained mind does not want to be present. It is addicted to its own narrative. It is convinced that if it replays the past enough times it will find the answer that changes it. It is convinced that if it runs enough future projections it will find the certainty that eliminates risk. It will not. What it will find, in the present, when it is finally willing to be there, is something far more valuable than certainty. It will find clarity. And clarity, in the middle of whatever life is testing you with, is worth more than any amount of anxious backward or forward thinking. Come back to now. Again and again and again. This is the training. The 4th training, train your mind to respond, not react. There is a difference between a response and a reaction. And the difference is not small. It is the difference between a life you are directing and a life that is directing you. A reaction is automatic. It is the untrained mind's first, fastest, most instinctive output, shaped entirely by past conditioning, by fear, by the accumulated emotional residue of every similar situation that has come before. A reaction does not assess the present moment. It pattern matches it to the past and fires accordingly. A response is chosen. It comes from the space between stimulus and impact, the space that the trained mind has learned to create and inhabit before deciding what to do next. Think of it in physical terms. A person who has never trained their body stumbles on uneven ground and falls, because the reflexes required to catch themselves were never developed. A person who has trained, who has built balance, proprioception, physical awareness through consistent practice, stumbles on the same ground and catches themselves. Not because they saw it coming, but because their body had been prepared for exactly this kind of unpredictability. The trained mind does the same thing. It doesn't avoid provocation. It doesn't avoid difficulty or injustice or the kind of interpersonal friction that would have once sent it into reactive freefall. It simply catches itself in the stumble, before the fall, and chooses. A woman named Irene had what she described as a hair trigger. The right tone of voice, the particular combination of dismissal and condescension that she had grown up inside, and she was gone. Flooded. Reactive. Saying things she regretted and doing things she had to apologize for, and hating herself afterward for the loss of control she had promised herself, again and again, she would not repeat. The trigger was real. The pain underneath it was real. But Irene learned, through years of deliberate practice, of sitting with the discomfort, of examining the stories, of learning to pause before the flood, that the trigger did not have to determine the outcome. That between the trigger and the reaction was a space. And in that space was the version of herself she actually wanted to be. She trained for that space the way an athlete trains for a race. Not waiting for the race to figure out how to run it. Preparing, in the ordinary, unglamorous, repetitive work of daily practice, so that when the race came, the preparation spoke for you. For training's deep. And I want you to feel something right now, not inspiration that evaporates the moment the video ends, but the kind of settled, serious, clear-eyed recognition that what we are talking about is not self-improvement in the decorative sense. This is survival preparation. This is the work of building a mind that can hold what life is going to ask it to hold, without collapsing, without fragmenting, without becoming unrecognizable to yourself in the middle of something hard. We trained the mind to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. We trained it to examine its own stories instead of being governed by them. We trained it to live in the present instead of suffering across 3 time zones. We trained it to respond instead of react. There is something nobody tells you about the people who handle crisis with grace. The ones who lose everything and rebuild without bitterness. The ones who receive devastating news and somehow remain standing. The ones who walk through fire, real fire, the kind that reduces ordinary lives to ash, and come out the other side not broken but clarified. People look at them and say, they are just built differently. Some people are just stronger. Some people are just wired for this. They are not. They are prepared. Not by luck. Not by genetics. Not by some mysterious reservoir of resilience they were born with and you were not. By training. Quiet, unglamorous, daily training, done in the ordinary moments, long before the extraordinary ones arrived to demand everything they had. And in part 1 we built the first 4 pillars of that training. We trained the mind to sit with discomfort. To examine its own stories. To live in the present. To respond rather than react. Now we finish the building. Because the storm is not waiting for you to be ready. Let's go. The 5th training, train your mind to embrace uncertainty. Here is the truth that the untrained mind spends its entire life trying to escape. You do not know what is coming. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Not in the next hour. You do not know who will still be standing beside you 5 years from now. You do not know which of the things you have built will hold and which will crack under pressures you cannot yet anticipate. You do not know whether the plan you have made with such care and such intelligence will unfold the way you designed it, or whether life will arrive with its own design entirely, one that bears no resemblance to yours. You do not know. And the untrained mind, desperate for the certainty it can never actually have, responds to this truth in one of 2 ways. It either freezes, paralyzed by the anxiety of not knowing. Or it manufactures false certainty, rigid plans, controlling behaviors, the exhausting performance of having everything figured out, as a defense against the vulnerability of not knowing. Neither response serves the life you are trying to build. Because certainty is not available. It has never been available. And every unit of mental energy spent chasing it is energy stolen from the only thing that actually is available. The present moment, navigated with wisdom and with trust. There was a sailor named Dominic who had spent 20 years on open water. Not recreational sailing, commercial fishing, in unpredictable seas, in conditions that had humbled far more experienced men than him. Early in his career, Dominic was terrified of uncertainty. Every voyage began with elaborate attempts to predict and control, obsessive weather checking, over-preparation, the anxious need to account for every variable before leaving the harbor. The sea taught him something that no classroom could. The sea cannot be controlled. It can only be navigated. And navigation, real navigation, the kind that gets you home through the worst conditions, is not about eliminating uncertainty. It is about developing such a deep, practiced relationship with uncertainty that you are no longer destabilized by it. You read it. You work with it. You adjust in real time, trusting your preparation and your judgment rather than the impossible fantasy of a sea that does exactly what you planned for. 20 years in, Dominic moved through uncertainty the way a fish moves through water. Not because the water had become safer. Because he had become more capable inside it. Epictetus made the architecture of this training explicit. He said, with the calm certainty of a man who had genuinely internalized it, that the only sane response to the things outside our control is acceptance. Not passive resignation. Not defeated surrender. But the active, courageous, deeply liberating choice to stop fighting the fundamental nature of reality and start working skillfully within it. What you cannot control, release. What you can control, your preparation, your values, your response, your next deliberate move, pour everything into that. This is not weakness. This is the most sophisticated relationship with reality that a human mind can develop. Train yourself to be comfortable inside the unknown. Start small, resist the urge to check the outcome before the process is finished. Sit with an unresolved situation without immediately forcing a resolution. Let a question live in your mind without demanding an immediate answer. Build tolerance for not knowing. Because the life ahead of you will contain vast, important, unavoidable territories of not knowing, and the mind that has been trained to navigate uncertainty will move through those territories with a steadiness that will feel, to everyone watching, like something close to miraculous. It is not miraculous. It is prepared. The sixth training, train your mind to lose well. Nobody teaches us how to lose. We are taught, in school, in sport, in the relentless optimism of motivational culture, to win. To succeed. To achieve. To manifest. To pursue with relentless positivity the outcomes we have decided we deserve. And then we lose. Because everyone loses. Because loss is not the exception to a life well lived. Loss is a fundamental, unavoidable, deeply instructive component of it. And because nobody taught us how to lose, we do it badly. We collapse into it, or we harden against it, or we spend years carrying the weight of a loss that was never processed, never integrated, never allowed to do what loss is actually designed to do. Teach us something we could not have learned any other way. There was a man named Kofi who had built a company over 11 years. Not quickly, carefully. Brick by brick, relationship by relationship, decision by decision. It was not just his livelihood. It was his identity. The physical manifestation of everything he believed he was capable of. It failed. Not through negligence. Through a combination of market forces and circumstances that no amount of intelligence or effort could have fully prevented. Kofi had two choices in the aftermath. And he could feel both of them pulling at him simultaneously, two gravitational forces of almost equal strength. He could make the failure mean something catastrophic about him. About his worth. About what was possible for the rest of his life. He could carry it as evidence, permanent, defining, irrefutable, that he was not the person he had believed himself to be. Or he could do something much harder and much more useful. He could let the failure be exactly what it was, an event. A painful, costly, significant event, but an event. Not a verdict. Not an identity. Not a life sentence. He could lose well. Losing well does not mean losing without pain. The pain is real and it deserves to be honored. Losing well means allowing the loss to be felt completely, without the additional weight of shame, self-punishment, or the catastrophic meaning-making that the untrained mind immediately reaches for. It means sitting in the rubble and asking, not why did this happen to me, but what is this asking me to understand? Seneca wrote with a directness that still lands like a fist across 2,000 years. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that things are difficult. Extend that to loss. We do not learn from loss not because loss is uninstructive, it is the most instructive force in a human life. We do not learn from it because we do not dare to sit inside it long enough to hear what it is saying. Dare to sit inside it. Dare to lose well. Because the person who has learned to lose well, who has developed the capacity to absorb loss without being defined by it, is a person who is genuinely free to try again. Without the paralysis of self-protection. Without the armor of never fully committing because full commitment means risking full loss. They try again. Fully. Openly. With everything they have. Because they know, in the bones, not just in the head, that whatever happens, they will survive it. They will find what it is trying to teach them. And they will keep building. That is freedom. Train for it. The seventh training, train your mind to choose its environment. You are not separate from the environment you inhabit. This is one of the most underestimated truths in all of human psychology. We like to believe, because it is flattering, because it speaks to our sense of individual agency, that we can maintain the quality of our minds regardless of the quality of the environment we immerse them in. That we are strong enough, disciplined enough, self-aware enough to remain unaffected by what surrounds us. We are not. The mind is porous. It absorbs, constantly, automatically, largely without our conscious awareness, the energy, the values, the thought patterns, the emotional frequencies of the people and environments it spends the most time inside. Surround a mind with chaos, and it learns to think chaotically. Surround it with negativity, and its default lens becomes negative. Surround it with mediocrity, and the ambitions that once felt vivid and possible begin, gradually and almost imperceptibly, to feel naive. But surround it with depth. With seriousness of purpose. With people who are doing the real work of living intentionally and thinking carefully and building something that matters, and something remarkable begins to happen inside it. It rises. Not through effort. Through osmosis. There was a young woman named Nadia who grew up in an environment that did not believe in her. Not cruelly, simply limitingly. The people around her had made a quiet, collective peace with smallness. With staying within the boundaries of what was known and safe and familiar. And their peace, their genuine, settled, unambitious peace, was so total and so pervasive that Nadia had begun, without realizing it, to absorb it as her own. Until she found a different environment. A mentor. A community. A set of books that opened doors in her mind she hadn't known were there. A conversation with someone who was living at a level she had only privately, guiltily, dared to imagine for herself. Within 18 months, Nadia was unrecognizable. Not because she had become a different person. Because she had finally found an environment that reflected back to her who she had always been capable of becoming, and her mind, starved for exactly this kind of nourishment, absorbed it with an appetite that astonished even her. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He sought out the wisest minds of his era. He read voraciously. He surrounded himself, in his private hours, with the thoughts and philosophies of people who were operating at the highest levels of human wisdom. He was Emperor of Rome. He did not need to do this. He did it because he understood that even the most powerful mind requires the right environment to remain sharp, to remain humble, to remain genuinely wise rather than simply powerful. Audit your environment. Not with judgment, with honesty. What are the voices you spend the most time inside? What are the conversations that dominate your days? What are the values of the people whose company you inhabit most consistently? And are those voices, those conversations, those values, building the mind you need for the life you are trying to live? If the answer is not a clear and honest yes, then one of the most important acts of mental training you can undertake is the deliberate, courageous, sometimes uncomfortable work of changing the environment. Not abandoning people carelessly. Not burning bridges for the sake of self-improvement theater. But intentionally, seriously, with full understanding of what is at stake, moving toward the environments that make you more of who you actually are. Your mind will follow where you place it. Place it wisely. The eighth training, train your mind to act before it feels ready. And now we come to the training that separates everything else from actual results. Because every training we have discussed today, sitting with discomfort, examining stories, living in the present, responding rather than reacting, embracing uncertainty, losing well, choosing the right environment, every single one of them is preparation. And preparation, without action, is just a very sophisticated form of staying exactly where you are. The mind, left to its own untrained devices, will always find a reason to wait. I'm not ready yet. I need more information. Let me think about it a little longer. The timing isn't right. I'll start when things settle down. I'll begin when I feel more confident. These sentences are not caution. They are the untrained mind's most elegant defense against the vulnerability of actually trying. Because trying means risking. And risking means the possibility of the very loss and discomfort and uncertainty we have spent this entire conversation learning to sit with. But here is what the trained mind understands that the untrained one cannot. Readiness is not a feeling. It is a decision. There was a man named Marcus, not the emperor, a different Marcus, who had wanted to write a book for 9 years. 9 years of thinking about it. Of researching. Of telling people about it at dinner parties. Of knowing, with complete certainty, that one day when the conditions were right and the confidence was sufficient and the timing was finally perfect, he would sit down and begin. The conditions were never right. The confidence was never sufficient. The timing was never perfect. Because none of those things arrive before the beginning. They arrive through the beginning. The confidence does not precede the action. It is built by it, brick by brick, page by page, attempt by attempt, failure by failure and recovery by recovery, until one day you look back at the distance you have covered and realize that the person who began this journey could not have imagined being where you are now. But they began anyway. That beginning, imperfect, unready, frightened, uncertain, was the most important moment in the entire story. Epictetus said it with characteristic bluntness. Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. Your trained mind is not an idea you carry around. It is a practice you enact, in real conditions, with real stakes, in the real and imperfect and sometimes terrifying arena of your actual life. Begin before you are ready. Adjust as you go. Trust that the training, all of it, will speak for itself when the test arrives. Because it will. The integration, what a trained mind actually looks like. I want to close with a portrait. Not of a perfect person. Not of someone who never struggles or doubts or feels the weight of what life asks of them. But of someone who has done the work, consistently, seriously, in the unglamorous ordinary days, and has become, because of that work, someone genuinely different from who they were before. This person sits with discomfort without running from it. Not because they enjoy it, but because they have learned that discomfort is not the enemy. It is the teacher. And they have become, through practice, students who are no longer afraid of the lesson. They examine their own stories with clear, honest, compassionate eyes. They know the difference between what is true and what is simply familiar. And they choose truth, even when familiar is more comfortable. They live in the present. Not perfectly, the mind wanders, as it always will. But they return. Again and again, without drama, without self-judgment. Back to now. Back to what is real and available and actionable in this moment. They respond. In situations that would have once sent them into reactive freefall, they pause. They breathe. They choose. Not always perfectly. But more often than before. And more often with each passing day. They have made a settled peace with uncertainty. They do not need to know how the story ends before they are willing to continue living it. They navigate, skillfully, thoughtfully, with genuine trust in their own preparation, through the vast territories of not knowing that every human life contains. They lose well. They feel the loss completely, without the added weight of shame or self-destruction. They sit in the rubble long enough to hear what it is trying to teach them. And then they build again. They have chosen their environment with the same seriousness they bring to every other area of their training. They know that the mind is shaped by what surrounds it, and they have surrounded it, as deliberately and as consistently as possible, with what builds rather than diminishes. And they act. Before they are ready. With the trained confidence of someone who has sat with enough discomfort, examined enough stories, lived in enough present moments, made enough responses instead of reactions, to know that they are more capable than their fear has ever been willing to admit. This is the trained mind. Not a myth. Not a personality type you were either born with or not. A practice. Available to every human being willing to show up for it, in the ordinary days, before the extraordinary ones arrive. Starting today. One final story. There was an old teacher who was asked by a student, "When is the best time to begin training the mind?" The teacher answered without hesitation. 20 years ago. The student was quiet for a moment. Then asked, "And if I didn't begin 20 years ago?" The teacher looked at the student with the particular kind of patience that only belongs to people who have genuinely understood something. "Then the best time is now. It has always been now. It will always be now. The test is coming. It may already be here. And the question, the only question that has ever mattered, is not whether you are ready. It is whether you are willing to begin."